So make it funky, funky.
They come around, but they never come through. They come around, but they never come through.
What is going on?
Well, that's why I'm here. I hope you were going to tell me, George. You have access to so many different people that I thought someone in this world would come in and say, this is the answer.
Must have been one or two case studies that first cropped up that got you to say, hey, there's something weird here. I'm going to study this. How'd that happen for you?
Well, originally, I got a notification from a national park ranger that he had worked at a series of national parks, and they had an unusual amount of disappearances, and the people had disappeared in unusual places that really didn't make a lot of sense to this person. And over the years, they tried to do a little research and figure out what happened, and they got stymied. And the more they looked into it, into their internal system, he got concerned that there wasn't enough being done. And eventually ended up contacting me when I was at a park doing some peripheral research. And we started to look into disappearances in the U.S. National Park system. Probably the first case that brought my interest was a case of Stacy Eros that disappeared in Yosemite.
Yeah.
A 14-year-old girl that was on a pack train ride into Sunrise Lakes, into the High Sierra area of Yosemite. Her and her dad stopped at a series of cabins. She got off her horse, freshened up, and her and a 70-year-old man named Stuart went and took a short walk off to this bluff, and she brought her camera, and they were going to just take pictures. Mm-hmm. The trail hands saw them walk over there, and she walked away from Stuart and told Stuart she was going to walk down to a lake to take some pictures. And the trail hand and Stuart saw her walk down there, and that was the last time she was ever seen. Jeez. To date in North America, we've established 52 clusters of missing people in national parks and national forests throughout North America. Wow. The biggest cluster in the world of missing people, Yosemite National Park.
Are these disappearances also happening in cities where you don't have parks?
So to this point, we established a profile that is based upon hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of disappearances and thousands of reports that we've read about missing people. So this profiling, it's a specific point we're looking for. Namely, canines that are brought in can't find a scent. They disappear and there's nothing heard. There's nothing seen. There's no abduction scenario.
Footprints, nothing.
Nothing. The people a lot of times are walking with friends or parents, and they're either first in line or they're last in line when they disappear. And those people don't hear or see anything either.
You turn around and they're gone.
Exactly. One of the specific scenarios that we get asked is that, well, maybe it's an animal attack. So in the search and rescue reports, they bring in trackers, they bring professional people in. In each one of those cases, it's completely absolved that there isn't an animal.
So basically, the conspiracy, if you don't know, is that a lot of missing people come up out of national parks. Bodies would go completely missing, not found at all, or they would be found in weird conditions. I'll just put it that way. To go back to David Pilates, he goes on a lot of podcasts and he's talking about all the data that he found super alarming when it comes to this situation. And he's so moved by it that he decides to file for a list of the missing people. He's on the phone with an attorney for park services. So they call him and ask him why he wants the information, and he said he knew, due to the Freedom of Information Act, that it didn't matter why he wanted the information. So then they say, okay, they were just wondering. All right, cool. So then they come back and they say they didn't have a list of the missing people, and they didn't know. And he said, basically, he explained that he was a published author and wanted to use his exemption for them to get the list to him by putting it together. So they said his books aren't in enough libraries for that, which is kind of funny. They're like, well, how popular are you? weird. Okay, so they basically have like lists for things like movies made at the park. It's assumed that they just didn't want to give it up and they're just purposely giving this guy a hard time. There are many cases where parents say the kid was just there and the next thing they knew they went missing within seconds. Titled, I am a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. I have some stories to tell. I wasn't sure where else to post these stories, so I figured I'd share them here. I've been an SAR officer for a few years now, and along the way, I've seen some things that I think you will be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time, they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff and they can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old stay where you are thing, and they don't wander far. But I've had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons cases I get called on. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time both the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we were asked where her brother was, she told us that he'd been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet and that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was a tall and covered in hair like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched that area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. One of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me involved in the search for a young woman who had gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out until late at night because the dogs had picked up her scent. When we found her, she was curled up under a large rotted log. She was missing her shoes and pack, and she was clearly in shock. She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to the base ops. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking why that big man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone. We just wrote it off as some weird symptoms of shock. But the closer we got to base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking to tell him to stop making faces at her. At one point, she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. She wasn't going to go with him, she said, and she wouldn't give us to him. We finally got her to keep moving, but we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like. I don't really know how else to describe it. When we were within sight of base ops, the woman turns to me and her eyes are about as wide as I can imagine a human can open them. She touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. Right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing right in my ear, and I just about jumped out of my skin. I hustled her to ops, trying not to show how freaked out I was, but I have to say I was really happy when we left the area that night. Wow, so let me know what you guys think about that. That was crazy. That was really spooky now after watching the movie and seeing the Reddit thread. Sheesh. Okay. So now let's get into the movie. Okay, so of course, the movie surrounds a park ranger, a woman named Lennon, and I thought it was an interesting movie. I personally think people didn't like the movie because they wanted some coherent answer for why things were happening, when I think the whole message is that there isn't an answer. There isn't an answer for many conspiracies, and that bothers people, and is probably why it turns a lot of people off of them. So this huge conspiracy, I feel like they hit home with the movie that is supposedly based on it. The ego essentially doesn't like the unknown. However, I like that they left this ambiguous ending up to your discretion. Like many other rabbit holes, you find yourself uncertain and uncomfortable. You have no choice but to use your discernment. I feel this movie does a splendid job of symbolizing the experience of diving deep into the dark abyss of a cult and the reality of what may happen when the abyss looks back at you. Synchronicities, paranoia, insomnia, people looking at you like you're crazy for saying things that are actually happening. It starts to feel like the Twilight Zone, right? Just like the movie. Some may lose their minds. Some may find their soul. It's all lovely, dark, and very, very